years. And we're excited for you guys to be able to hear directly from her. High Alpha is a leader across the internationally, really, in their space. And so I think you guys are going to get a wealth of valuable information and resources. So I hope you're taking notes. I hope you go back and review the recording, as we are recording it tonight for those who aren't going to be able to make it. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda and allow her to share her screen and any other material she wants to share with you all tonight. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me or to Winnie, drop them in the chat. But again, welcome you all tonight for this another installation of our Tech Talk series.
Thanks so much, Mark. That's great. I am thrilled to be here. I love that my formal bio doesn't actually tell you a lot, which we'll talk a little bit about how to craft those stories based on what you're actually trying to communicate. But the long and short of it is I've hired hundreds or thousands of people across my career so far. And so I am hoping that I can give you guys a little bit of the inside baseball of how to best navigate creating your resumes and putting through applications that can actually make your job search effective. I know how frustrating it can be to feel like you are putting in so much work and it's so time consuming to not yield results or actually get the jobs you want. So hopefully we can move the needle for that a little bit today. So I love to keep this as a conversation. I'm not sure how you guys have typically run these, but I think that the group is succinct enough that will be able to just have a dialogue, and we can even get into like personal situations and questions. So please feel free to hop in. I talk fast, and so you'll probably have to just like cut me off, and then that way we can make sure that we're actually addressing questions as they come up.
Sounds great.
Good. Okay, so most of what I wanted to cover today. So first, I think we should talk a little bit about how to craft your base resume. So this is going to be, I know that you guys are all already into your careers. I don't want to sound pandering for some of the stuff that we're going to cover, where a lot of this you might be like, oh, I already know how to do that. This is not my first rodeo. But figure we can cover it so that way we can at least bring up questions. Once we talk about crafting your base resume, we're going to talk about why you're never going to submit that as an application and how you're going to actually get bespoke resumes for each role that you're applying to make them more effective. We'll talk through cover letters, what to do when they're necessary, when they're not necessary, how to craft ones that are actually effective, because those can be incredibly time consuming. We can also hopefully I think we'll have plenty of time, but talk about even identifying what you're applying for and if you're actually applying for the correct roles. And that kind of comes down to kind of knowing thyself and knowing the company. And then finally, just some tactics of once your application is in, what can we do within our control to get a call back? So that's most of what I had planned, but I will be here. I can be here all night. I can pour myself a glass of wine if we just want to have Q&A time afterwards. But yeah, so anything that anyone else wants to cover that I haven't addressed already? No. Okay, let me turn off my notifications so we don't get my mom texting me in our ear the entire time. All right, so first and foremost, your base resume. So there's a lot of advice about resumes out there. So I'm going to go through some of the questions that I get most common, and then what my suggested framework is for a resume. So my suggested framework is a 4-part resume. First, a summary. So your summary is going to be the 2 to 3 sentence high-level people story. So if I were to, it's your elevator pitch, to use that term. So what you want to do is you want to, if I don't read anything else, what are the highlights? So I'll use myself as an example, not because I'm a narcissist, but because now that you guys know a little bit about my background, I can use that as an example of how I would craft these. So for me, I would say I am an HR and recruiting leader who has spent the past decade of my career working in tech startups and venture studios, and my expertise is at it's at the crossroads of both tech and venture, and how to scale those teams and design effective programs. That's not reading my resume to you guys. That's just off the top of my head, but you get the idea. We're talking about 2 to 3 sentences that will tell me who you are when it comes to your career. The next section that's really important is going to be your skills section. And so summary is relatively forthcoming. You guys can write a couple sentences about yourself. The skills section, I think, is where things can go wrong. The reason you want a skills section or a tools section is because it's really important for you to have certain keywords in your resume. So oftentimes recruiters, or even the systems that HR teams use to sift through applications, they will auto reject if you do not have certain things. So I'll use like a software development role. I don't think we've got any engineers here, but an example of that is if the job description says, hey, you need to know JavaScript, but you don't have JavaScript in your resume, then the applicant tracking system may kick you out, even if you're a perfect match for it, just because you weren't as specific as using JavaScript. So those keywords, it's a little bit of gamification. And so when you're looking at, and we'll talk about this in a second, but when you're looking at a job description, you want to pull out, if they say a tool, you want that tool on your resume. If you can credibly say that you've used that tool. So pick out those keywords, because sometimes you can actually get your application will just get kicked out before another human sees it because you didn't have a keyword in there. The other way that the skill section can get you is is what you're including, right? So if I say I'm hiring a software engineer, but in their skill section, they're telling me that they're proficient in Microsoft Word, that's not really a positive indicator for me. To me, that tells me, one, I think this day and age, we all should be proficient in Microsoft Office Suite. But two, it's not relevant to the role. So especially on resumes where real estate can be competitive with other things you're trying to include, just know you're signaling something with what you're putting in there. So be confident that what I'm saying shows that I'm like really competent professional, and that these aren't just table stakes things that I'm regurgitating because most people actually have these skills. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about how that works?
Hey, Kira, go ahead and take yourself off mute.
Okay. Hi, Amanda. Thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us. So yeah, so I have a question about that section. So like, let's say for example, because like I know a lot of like different companies use certain project management tools, right? So let's say they include one type of project management tool, or they don't specify, but you know a few. So would you say that it's good practice to list all of them, or just list the ones they mention, or don't mention at all? Is that something that would be implied?
That's a great question. List them all if you can, because I think that also will demonstrate your seniority, that you have had the opportunity to use multiples. When real estate's at a premium, which is that's where you have to start making those concessions of, okay, if I have to trim something out, where don't list every single software you've ever touched, but if you can say, hey, I've actually used the top 3 project management tools, it's probably a good demonstration in your resume.
Okay. Sorry, I have another quick follow-up question. So let's say, for example, like, because there's that argument that, one second, sorry. Yeah, so there's that argument about whether or not you should put your education in your skills section. Would you say that it's necessary? Because like because I feel like especially with tech, education is not necessarily as important. I mean, for some companies it may be, but for others it's not. So like I think I'm always like juggling between, well, do I put my degrees? Do I not put my degrees? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Totally. And that's a really smart question. So yes, I would actually so I consider education, like yourself, especially for skilled professionals, I'm usually making a decision based on their experience, not their education. However, I would give the opposite advice to a new grad. They don't really they might have some internships, but they're really trying to leverage their education to get into that first role. So it depends on that. Absolutely, you worked really hard to get those degrees, and it shows, it demonstrates more than just your proficiency in that specific domain. If you're a history major, great, you're going to make great dinner conversation. But what it does tell me is that you had the wherewithal and the fortitude to be able to obtain a degree, and it sounds like you got multiples. So, short answer is yes, and I put it at the bottom of your resume unless you're a new grad. But within education, I also consider certifications in there as well. So you can say, hey, I'm a graduate of IU and I studied business, but then I also have my PMP certification or any other credentials that you've acquired along your career as well. But agreed, for skilled people, that's towards the bottom and usually the last consideration.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Any other questions that anybody has? Don't be shy.
A couple other things top of mind, and while if anyone has any questions that I get asked a lot is like, can I have a 2-page resume? And my answer is absolutely. So 1-page resumes came back from the day where we had to manually and physically review paper copies of resumes. And so you would imagine multiple pages can create much more of an administrative burden because of staples. It's kind of funny that this like lore that we all live our lives, that many people live their applications by, is just something that's an old artifact. But the spirit of it that's important is you do not need to have a 1-page resume. However, your resume should reflect the information that I actually need to know, because if there's too much information, I'm going to lose the information that I need to know in other stuff. You're typically going to get about 30 seconds of whoever is reviewing your resume's time. And so you want to make it succinct enough that they're able to get out the important stuff, but also long enough where you're conveying what you want to convey. So taking out your education or taking out those other systems that you know how to use, it's probably worth the 2nd page for that, or the 3rd page.
Thank you so much for that, Amanda. It looks like Whitney, you have a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So this is a new concept for me, like putting your education at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question, about that. So
Yeah.
like if we're a career changer, so I'm a career changer,
Mm-hmm.
and I transitioned into tech in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some experience, but I would still say that I'm pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
At what point would you even say, okay, you could put the education towards the bottom? And if like I'm going into a brand new field, because marketing is somewhat new, is that going to determine whether I put my education at the top or the bottom? I may be overthinking this, but that's how I am.
No, it's a great question, because we're career changers, not new into our career. So I kind of talked out of both sides of my mouth with if early in your career, you're getting the job based off of your education. So for me, Whitney, the thing that I would think of is your education compelling? So did you have a marketing degree? Did you get a business degree where you took a marketing course? That would be a compelling reason to move it. Alternatively, education at the bottom, unless it's relevant to, it's specifically more relevant than your experience, I actually would prioritize your not direct experience to demonstrate that you have been in the workforce. Because you guys, I'm sure, have all worked with like an intern, and you're like, oh, honey, you don't even know how to use a calendar. And that's like the basic table stakes of like how this place runs, so showing that you're a professional to me, even if you've been a professional in something that we can't necessarily attribute, correlate skills, is more important to me than like, for example, your history degree if you're going into marketing. And I'm not saying that's what you have, but I would say education would be prioritized if it's more relevant than your work experience.
That makes so much sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Whitney. Candace?
Hi. So my question is around the formatting of your resume. I know we were talking about like 2 pages versus 1 page and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine, like, I've been hearing a lot of ATS conversation, making sure things are ATS friendly,
Mm-hmm.
and have like solicited services from like Fiverr and things like that. However, I'm not seeing as many positive results with the ATS friendly, quote unquote. And I'm wondering, is that even like, how do you distinguish whether or not, or how do you create your own, or, how do you determine if that's relevant for the job that you're applying for?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question because we can't know for sure. So we have to almost find clues. And so the way that I do that is in the job description. So they posted something that I'm responding to in most cases when you're pursuing a job. So I'm going to look at that and I'm going to use that as um, I'm going to repeat back to you what you told me you needed in my own words that I have, type of thing. So it matters if they told you it matters in that job description. In some cases, you can do some public available research to know what might be important to them. So, for example, in Whitney's case, being a marketer, she can see, do they have social accounts? Do they post those to those social accounts? Could I actually include something in my cover letter that would make a recommendation of how I could drive more traffic? If it was marketing, can she see that they have their website built on WordPress and I actually know how to use WordPress, or I've taken a class, or I can like get smart about it in between when I tell you that I have some exposure to WordPress and when the interview comes. So I think the best way to try to do that insane prediction of what actually matters to them is comb through the job description and then see about what kind of creative research you can do on the business outside of the job description.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Maya.
Hi, good evening.
Hey, Maya.
Thanks for taking the time to meet with us today. So my question is, it's kind of unique, but at the same time not. Okay, so I'm a digital nomad, and I don't live in the US right now. I have a permanent address that is for Texas for tax purposes and receiving my mail. So my question comes along with that. When I am in the US, I tend to float around, but Texas is like where I live on paper. So would you say and I only tend to look for remote work, obviously, but would you say it's would it be more beneficial to structure my resume? I've been traveling for 10 months. And right now, my newest version of my resume doesn't have a location on it at all. I don't put my address. I also don't put my phone number. I just have my email and my website. So do you think that I'm not really sure which would get me rejected more. If I don't have my address, location and phone number, or if I do have my location and phone number. My permanent address is Houston. So and with the research I've done, I've seen that some places off the bat will reject you if you're not local or in one of their states where you can work. But I also, I don't know, I try to avoid the actual digital nomad conversation until it's necessary.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question, which by the way, I would love to hear more about you being a digital nomad because that sounds awesome. I'm currently living in New York and I'm usually in Indy. So a little bit of the spirit myself, but long story short is it's a new modern question. We wouldn't have to ask this question 5 years ago in a conversation like this. So I think it's a smart one to be asking. It really comes down to, I think, being protective of your time. And this is one of the harsh realities. It's almost like dating of if there is a deal breaker and we know it's a deal breaker, then let's save all of our time. Because with location, that's one of the things that it's really hard for you to influence by being an amazing candidate. I'm sure Maya, what you're thinking is just get me a chance to get in front of someone and I'm going to be compelling and they're going to understand why I have more value than the fact that I don't live in Texas right now. The problem is that location tends to be it's a deal breaker because so I also run HR, and it's my least favorite part of my job, where it's my job for the business to make sure that we are compliant and paying taxes, so the business can get sued if I don't do that the correct way. So when I have to work with our team on their movements or keeping their current address, it's not because I don't want them to go and enjoy their life and do whatever they want. It's because I could put the business at risk if I did that. And we're a small company, so we're about as least bureaucratic as you could possibly get. You go to like a Lilly, for example, or a Salesforce, or well, you're in Houston, so Lilly might not even ring a bell, but where their hands are truly tied, and you, by the time that comes out, you could have already invested your 2 or 3 hours of your own time, you know? So that's where I think that being forthcoming with that is probably good, because you can weed out and be protective of your own time. But if I were you, I would leave out the fact that you do it outside of the US. And I don't think I think that it's pretty low stakes whether or not you include your phone number or your location on your resume. I haven't seen ATSs kick out for that.
Okay, awesome. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, it's a unique modern problem. But usually location, that's not one, no matter how wonderful you are, that they can concede on.
Some really good insight. Melanie, I'm going to read her question. She says she has some background noise, but her question is about how do you distinguish what keywords are needed in order to get our resume a second look?
Yeah, similarly to Candace's question is, I wish that we could always know. We don't, but usually applicant tracking systems are scraping based off of the job description. So look at that job description, and every little word you see in that job description, the closer your resume and or application looks to that job description, the more likely that you've got those keywords in there.
Awesome. Hopefully that answers your question. Very thorough. Okay, thank you. All right. Your hand is still raised. Do you have another question?
Oh, sorry, put it down.
Okay. Well, you can continue, Amanda.
Great. No, thank you guys for the questions. It makes it so much more fun to have an actual conversation. But let me think of other questions that I get, or I'm looking through my notes here. Then you're going to want to go into your work history. So summary, skills, work history, education. So those are going to be your 4 sections. Maya asked a really good question of like, do I need to include location? Do I need to include my phone number? The good news is if you put it in there, you don't have to worry about if it's going to get kicked out. So if you feel comfortable, put that all in there. The one thing that I would say is that I personally feel uncomfortable putting my home address, like the full home address, because there's a few things that people can make inferences on, right? We all go to Zillow. I am sure I'm not the only one where I get somebody's address and I'm like, I'll head over to Zillow and see what they paid for this house type of thing. And so when we talk about bias, especially being from underrepresented groups, is you don't want someone making an inference. It's wrong. It's disgusting that I have to say this, but I personally don't do it. I don't want anyone making a judgment on me based on where I live, or taking a piece of information and running with it. So that's also to protect you as well. That's a good point, Mercedes. You never know, the recruiter might get a crush on you, and then all of a sudden they've got your address, and then what do you do then? But city, location, if you see in the job description that you must live in a certain location, you can say based in the US, based in Indianapolis, based in wherever that is, because then you at least take that question out of their mind. So that's kind of a good thing as you're writing your resume to think about, what questions can I answer to take any doubts out of their mind? So one doubt could be like, oh, well, she might not live in a state that I'm able to hire in. Well, if I tell you that, then I can just take that off the table. So in your work experience section, try to list accomplishments. So there's a couple ways that I could, so when I introduced myself, I said, I've hired hundreds or thousands of tech individuals. Well, I can probably nail down that number, and I can make that, fluff that up and sound good, which sounds to demonstrate accomplishments versus language around just the activities that I was doing. Like responsible for hiring sounds way worse than hired 500 software engineers over the course of 5 years. So kind of use that active voice and brag and say, instead of saying responsible for social media, you can say drove a 15% increase of top of funnel leads through social media activity. Things like that are going to demonstrate what you've actually achieved and be a better voice than kind of the passive responsible for, served as type of language.
That's really good. I'm taking notes myself like that. I'm definitely guilty within my own resume of having to remove phrases like that from it to be a lot more specific and intentional about what you actually were accomplishing and getting comfortable. I think it's one of the things that maybe affects some people from different underrepresented backgrounds is that a lot of us were been raised not to really brag on ourselves and be so humble and talk about our accomplishments. So I think this is the perfect platform to give people just assurance that it's okay to talk about what you accomplished. That's what employers want rock stars who can get it all done, who can handle challenges, and to be able to speak to that specifically is very powerful.
Right. That active language can be huge. So that's great. In finishing up on your base resume, another question I get is, should I put my picture in my resume? Again, as underrepresented groups, that can either be in your favor for an organization who's going to value you because they're intentionally seeking diverse candidates. On the other hand, that could also, we all know the reason that we have to talk about DE&I is because a lot of organizations don't function that way. And by putting your picture in your resume, you are opening it up for potential interpretation, positive or negative. We'll talk about in a little bit as we're understanding what roles are the best ones for us. But like a large company, for example, you want to think about their culture. So if I'm going to go apply to Anthem or Lilly or highly regulated industry or like very bureaucratic, very kind of like old and conservative, not in politics, but just like kind of conservative culture wise, they may see it as vain. But you do it in tech, and tech we're used to seeing pictures on resumes, and it doesn't come off that way because it's the way that modern resumes are written because we live in the modern world. Some companies don't live in the modern world, so just think about that when you put that on. That's a great point, Mercedes. Yes, put your LinkedIn in your resume because now we're doing everything on the computer. And so what it does for me is it makes me like you because it saves me the time of having to copy and paste your name into LinkedIn and then make, especially if you've got a common name, trying to figure out who you are amongst all those people. So yeah, put your LinkedIn for sure and make sure that your LinkedIn, it doesn't need to match exactly, but it rhymes. Like there's nothing different about what you're presenting in the resume and what's presented on your LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
Yeah. This is where I'm not pandering, and I know this is not, I'm not telling you anything that you've not heard before, but when writing a resume, first of all, it takes hours, it's exhausting, and we all have like our own blind spots in our spelling and grammar. Use Grammarly. I think everyone, it's an online tool, but that's a more robust spell check that will also check for grammar. And just have 3 other people read it, like actually read it from top to bottom, not to give you, hopefully they can give you some insights on the content, but it's amazing my own errors that I've seen because I've been reading this document for hours and hours where my brain doesn't even pick it up. And someone's like, there's this glaring error in it. So, it sounds pandering, but spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes in resumes can just be an immediate throw out.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So that's basically for your base resume. That's the way that I would craft it. Colors, design, feel free, again, just knowing that you may, if you're applying to an old stodgy company, that they may not love that. But if you wouldn't love to be in a company that wouldn't love it, then that's saving your time. On the other hand, if any of you are designers or creatives, it's actually probably better for you to have a highly customized design resume that's compelling. So that's the only other kind of like trivial question I get is, oh, should I design this in Canva or can I just put it in Word? All right. So then to pivot, I talked a little bit about how you want to have a base resume, and I think 0% of the time you should send that base resume into any single application. And it all harkens back to this idea that we just simply we want to mimic the job description as much as possible. They told you they want something. Now think of it as I'm presenting myself as that. So for me, for my background, I can do a variety of things. So I could go be an HR leader at a tech company. I could be a recruiter for a venture capital firm. I could work in an agency. All three of those things I would have wildly different resumes for. So in one, I would highlight that I've handled all sorts of employee onboarding and taxes and accounting in different states and compliance. Well, if I put all of that, even though I'm really proud of that work and it was really hard for me to do all those things, but if I'm focused on highlighting that for recruiting for a venture capital firm, none of that's going to be in my job responsibilities. And so it's going to look like there's a mismatch between my understanding of the role and my background. Or they're just going to say, oh, even though I've done a ton of recruiting in my life, they're going to say, oh, no, she's much more of an HR lady than a recruiter. And we're really looking for a recruiter. When instead I can actually highlight my recruiting accomplishments and cater to what they're looking for.
Any questions about that from anybody on?
Or comments that it sounds like a giant pain in the ass and you don't want to redo your resume for every single one but I know that's it is, and it really makes it much, much more time intensive, but your hit rate is going to go through the roof. So in order to get one response, you're not going to have to send 10 applications. You're going to have to send 3.
I think Candace's hand is raised actually this time.
Oh, good. Hey, Candace.
So question about that. So if you're reformatting like multiple resumes to go for different industries or different roles, should you omit certain roles or like how should you structure? I know you want to put like relevant experience, but you don't want it to look like a gap. So how do you kind of balance the importance of what needs to be seen for one experience versus the other? Like if you're career pivoting or just looking for different roles that you might be qualified for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because by omitting something that you're like, oh, this isn't relevant, they don't need to know about it, you could then create questions of, oh, was she not working during that time? Sometimes omitting completely can create more questions that you don't even want to be on the table. So what I typically say will be summarize in a way where maybe you add no detail, but it's like years 2000 through 2010, worked in these 3 roles, which were all related to being in the hospitality industry, something like that. So you're taking up very minimal real estate on your resume. You're acknowledging that you were gainfully employed, but you don't find it to be relevant to go into that for the purposes of this particular resume.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. And then Melanie, I saw that your question, and that's a shame on me for having even gotten to this point yet, but when you have no experience whatsoever, it is all about transferable skills. And these can come from your work experience. These can come from your volunteer experience. So let me try to think of a good example here. So marketing, for example, sorry, Whitney, I'm just going to keep using marketing because it was the first like actual functional role that I heard. But Whitney might have 0 experience in marketing, but what does a marketer do? Okay, good. Well, it's different. So a marketer at a health insurance company isn't going to be a digital marketer there is going to be wildly different than like a content marketer over at Salesforce. So a content marketer, for example, that's a writer essentially. So Whitney could look at her background and say, okay, when have I written long form? Or let me go pursue opportunities that I can get for free. That's not my employer. So maybe for my church, I can offer to redo their website or create flyers. Maybe my friend has a startup that I can create a graphic for if I want to become a graphic designer. So you can create experience where there is no experience through mechanisms like that. And then the other thing you can do is your actual work experience, you can pull out transferable skills. So a good example of this for me in recruiting, what did I do in recruiting? Well, I sourced candidates, I screened those candidates, and then I negotiated with them what their offer package would look like. That could look like a lot like a salesperson. So I could say, well, while I haven't prospected new business, I've actually sourced candidates for roles. And my method for doing that looks a lot like what a salesperson would do to prospect new customers. I research people on LinkedIn, send out cold emails to try to get them to engage with me. My qualification of the candidates looks a lot like qualifying a lead. So looking at making that correlation. And then finally, I might not have been negotiating contracts, but I was negotiating job offers. And these are the facets in my negotiation style in that. So hopefully that's a good example where one, you can find ways to create experience that maybe isn't from your actual professional experience. And then two, really like show that there are transferable skills in what I've done here, even if I didn't do exactly the functional skill that I'm applying for.
Yeah, sorry, I'm coming off mute because some of the background noise has dissipated, but that is really helpful. Because Mark knows I told him that I had actually started applying for recruiting positions before I entered into the UI UX design program. And I still do have an interest in recruiting because my background right now is in management. It's like if I could make a transition some type of way, it would make it a lot easier to know exactly what someone is looking for. But it was like my resume was not getting any bites, and I could not figure out really why, because I felt like I was using some keywords, but obviously it wasn't the keywords that were really necessary in order to get my resume pulled. So it's definitely helpful to know, like, even though I don't have that that recruiting experience, excuse me, like what exactly to include in my resume that's relevant to that position, so that I can at least get something entry level into recruiting, since that is an interest, a career interest of mine as well.
Oh, that's great. And we should stay in touch too, Melanie, just as an aside. But yeah, and so as you're pursuing design, there's a lot of creative things that I'm sure you could point out in your background that would point to a proclivity towards design. So, and designers use interviewing to understand user research and stuff like that. So those are kind of things that you could also pluck out for, what you've been pursuing more recently.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Aya first, and then we'll circle back to Whitney.
Okay, so I'm really enjoying this conversation and everything that I hear you say. I forgot the exact moment where you mentioned it, but you mentioned something about like not wanting to show like gaps in like employment or on your resume. So I kind of have a question about that. Like with the pandemic, and also with like just society putting more emphasis on like mental health, entrepreneurship, how, and also like, do you foresee a shift, or is a shift already happening where like a gap in employment is not necessarily a bad thing? Like, and especially with a lot of us, I work in tech right now, doing UX design, but I want to transition more into marketing. But like, is it really seen as a bad thing if I have like a gap on my resume? And especially if, I mean, I don't know, traveling the world and saving money and like being able to do so, or just like working on personal projects, or working to enhance yourself, like with different education or like different ventures. And
Yeah.
I don't know, even would I need to like explain my whole life story? Like, what do you see that shift happening where it's like not seen, like looked down upon that you are not employed 24/7?
Yeah, that's a great comment of like, can we be fully formed human beings for once? And unfortunately, I want the world to be different, but I also want to be helpful in the way of like, our goal is to get the job because we know we're good people, right? And like we don't know what they're judging us on, but so we just want to take the question out of their mind. So there is still but you're right, it is absolutely changing. But there is a stigma attached to lapses in employment, good, bad, or ugly, and it's bad and ugly. But it's all about marketing, Maya. So you exactly what you said is that you are a better human being for your time off work. And so my recommendation for you or for anybody with a gap would be in the way that you market it. I see resumes where I'm like, I wonder what they were doing. Like, were they keeping their skills up between this point and this point? And people have directly called out, oh, I had children and I was a caretaker during that time. Like, oh, that makes a lot more sense than what I don't know what you were doing. Some people say, hey, I had the opportunity because I worked really hard and I saved money where I was able to go travel the world. And so the way that I would market your specific situation, Maya, is to say that on sabbatical and, I would even write in the countries that maybe you went to. And, again, I probably wouldn't do that if I was applying to like Eli Lilly, for example, but I would do that for, like a Salesforce or most tech companies. So, the answer is it shouldn't matter. It does matter. Market it the best way that you can and actually directly call it out on your resume rather than letting whoever is looking at the resume, their imagination run wild of what you were or were not doing during your time between roles.
Controlling your own narrative.
Yeah, that's a much better way to say it. Yeah, just control the narrative and put a positive spin on it because it is a net positive thing that you were able to do that. So getting out ahead of it versus leaving the question that like unanswered questions are always where like people's minds go wild. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't assume the best. A lot of times the worst is assumed, which is a sad fact. But by addressing it, you can take that off the table.
Okay, that makes sense. The unanswered questions part. That's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Jenny, I think you were next.
Oh yeah. So what are your thoughts on posting your resume, especially since we're gonna have a base resume and then tailored resumes? What do you think about putting your resume on LinkedIn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's good because LinkedIn, you're kind of rewriting a resume anyway. So there's certain like fundamental facts. Like I'm all about fudging. Like this is a marketing exercise, guys. Like we're branding ourselves with this, and so we can take some liberties. I've taken some liberties in my even being an HR lady in the way that I've marketed myself. But there's a couple facts that you can't get around, and that sometimes they're even including in your background checks for your pre-employment stuff, which is your education and where you worked and when you worked there, and probably also your title while you're there. You may be able to get away with a little title massaging. So for example, like I could say talent partner instead of director of talent or things like that. You just don't want it to be a wild jump. So if I'm looking at your resume and the dates don't match up, the companies don't match up, and the job titles are wildly different, that's going to be a red flag to me. It's like one of these is not true, and now I don't know which one. But if I'm like, okay, yeah, these largely map, that's great. So all the content, like what you're putting underneath there, could be wildly different from LinkedIn to your resume. But and that's really where you're massaging it usually for it anyway. But dates, companies, titles, education, if there's any discrepancy there, you're going to get into a pickle.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah, I love the conversation. So what else? So cover letters. I think that's a unique one to get into now. I hate writing cover letters and I hate reading cover letters. And they're the worst advice that I've ever heard is the one that I hear most prevalent with these, which is just create a base cover letter and apply that to everything. That's actually, I think, a net negative. And I don't think you should write a cover letter for every single job that you apply to, unless you have the time. A good cover letter is only going to increase your chances. However, we're already talking about making your resume custom. So I would prioritize that over the cover letter. For me, what the most effective thing in a cover letter is very likely applicable to everyone here who are career changers, which is tell me why, if you don't match the job description, why I still should take a phone call with you. So a really good way to talk about those transferable skills, Melanie, that we were talking about, where I might not read on a resume. I'm like, okay, so she's been a designer and now she wants to be a recruiter, which I know that's backwards, but you tell me that story. So the best, only write a cover letter if you're going to write a good one. Know that will increase your chances if you have the time. And then the things to include in a cover letter should be the opposite of generic. Your first paragraph should show me, you know, our company, you did your research, and you're excited about us. So for my company in particular, like we launch companies. So if someone were to write a cover letter and say, hey, I'm really energized and excited to apply to High Alpha Innovation. I have a passion for new company creation, and congratulations on your recent launches of DevNot and Greeter. Sorry, those words probably don't mean anything to you, but to me, it shows like, oh, they actually really like High Alpha Innovation and they have a passion for what we do. Next paragraph is where I would say, do that skills highlight. So this is why I'm important. This is why I would add value to your company. And then your last paragraph kind of put those two together. So to say, I'm excited about company creation. This is my experience in doing so. And then this is related to the role, how I would add value. So that's your cover letter can be like pretty succinct. If you can get all that covered in like three sentence paragraphs, that's great. So don't feel like it has to be like a full page, or the length is way less important than showing me, you know who we are and you're excited about it. You've got some transferable skills and you have an idea of how you could make an impact in an organization.
This is really good. Really, really good. Michael has a question as well.
Hey, Michael.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So previously you stated, let me catch my thought. It was regarding having multiple roles that are unique and different from each other, and that's a red flag. So how can, as Mark stated earlier, tell your story through these different roles and how it applies to being at the company? Because each company has a sales team, each company has a finance team. You know, you have managers, in other roles. So in my resume, I have experience in each ones I just mentioned. How do I, let's say if I'm going for, this would be perfect, a consulting role.
Yeah.
So how do I tie all that in? And let's say if it's a consulting role, and let's say it's another role that's, you know, vastly different, but I do have those transferable skills from previous roles. So that's the question for those two separate roles. And how do I tie it in and sell myself?
Right. Yeah, I think that's the way that I would do it, because you're right. I hear your background, and like management consultant would be a great match. So what do I think? In finance, you're probably creating financial models around internal company metrics, that sort of thing. Well, what does a management consultant do? They build financial models related to projects and profitability to present to their clients. So you can call out experience in financial modeling, have created, X, Y, and Z type of models, are expert at Excel, which is something that a management consultant would need. As a manager, and you said in sales as well, you're doing a ton of client management. Granted, you're managing different expectations than what a management consultant would do, but you're showing that you've got the executive acumen, the polish, the ability to negotiate, manage difficult conversations, manage conflict, things like that. And so tactically, how you would do that is, one, I would say in your summary to say, something along the lines of seasoned sales and finance professional looking to combine my two previous experiences to leverage my, sorry, I'm like trying to do resume speak off the top of my head, but like to combine my two superpowers into a role like management consulting, where I would be able to leverage my expertise in both. And then I think your cover letter, that second paragraph of where you directly correlate your skills to the role, is the other area where you can get a little bit more creative than where you're just like have a bullet point where you said, I did financial modeling.
Thank you. That was well put. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So yeah, cover letters, they're evil, but they can actually be really helpful. Try to write them if you want to. If they require one, obviously you have to do it and just make sure it's a good one. But if you're like, I don't want to write a cover letter for this, I've been investing too much time and I'm a pretty good fit and I don't need the extra push of the cover letter, you can skip the cover letter.
Awesome. Anybody lingering questions?
Yeah, well, then we can move on to my final topic, which is the knowing what to apply for. Like, what is it going to be a good fit for you? And so this is a particular area of passion because I work in startups, and a lot of people are very attracted to startups. They're like, ooh, that's young, that's sexy. I've seen Silicon Valley and it looks fun. And then they come and they're like, oh my God, this is a disorganized mess. And we're going to run out of money in 6 months. And I have to do 3 jobs instead of 1 job. And it's like, well, yeah, we're a startup. That's kind of there's always good stuff and bad stuff about the size of company you're looking at. So that's the first thing that I would do to start knowing thyself. One is not inherently better than the other. They're just different. So to highlight this, I'll use Salesforce as an example because I compete with a lot of tech talent for Salesforce with tech startups. What you're going to experience in a big company is you're going to have a ton of support. You're going to have great resources. You're probably going to have amazing perks and benefits. A big company like Salesforce can probably offer fertility benefits, for example, versus a 10-person startup would not be doing the right thing by you or the company by offering $50,000 in fertility benefits because there are other business priorities that we need to prioritize. So big companies, if you find yourself being someone who likes structure, I just want to know, show me the bullseye, show me what it's done, and I will do it excellently. You're going to like a big company. If you're somebody who likes freedom and creativity in the work that you're doing, well, there's probably a process at a big company that you've got to follow that process. In a startup, you probably won't have any guidance and say, hey, go accomplish this. For the right person, that's amazing. I love the creativity. For the wrong person, that's like, hey, I don't know how you expect me to do this. I don't have the resources to do it. I don't know what good looks like. No one's ever done this before. I have to define the whole process myself. So all of that to say is big company, you can expect training, you can expect rigor, you can also expect bureaucracy. You can also expect a much more narrowly scoped role where you might not be able to do everything in marketing. You might only be able to write content for one specific sales vertical. So those are the things that you should take into account when deciding between a big company and a small company. And again, these are generalizations and themes. Every company has a little bit of a different culture, but the biggest mistake that I see people that they could avoid are people who work better with support and structure should apply to big companies. People who require creativity and want a wide scope, they should look to smaller companies.
That's awesome. I think Michael has another question.
Yeah. Hey, Michael.
Hey, it's me again. Is there such thing as a hybrid? Is there I guess a mid-size firm that you could have the both of best world, or there's a 50 45 55 ratio where it's it's hard to get perfect, but close enough would be good, where you get to experience both at a firm, having that autonomy, being autonomous on some projects or that department, and the other one is like, okay, it's more structured here. Or that department offers both. What does that look like? Company wise, role wise? Company and role wise. I think that's a sweet spot.
Totally. And you're right. There's different cultures within an organization as well, where a finance team is probably going to be a lot more professional, maybe a lot more formal than the sales team, who can probably get away with being a little bit less professional, and who probably have a more jovial culture, even within the same organization. And these are also generalizations. Every company is going to be different. If you're going to work at like a highly regulated medical device company, some of that's not going to matter, because it's going to, like, you're going to have to track expenses thoroughly, so you don't trip a law that against something or other. You know what I mean? So it's industry specific for sure. These are also generalizations of big and small companies. But I think the first thing that I would say, Michael, is like, know yourself. Do you like structure, or do you like room for creativity? Because one is not inherently better than the other. They're just different. And so do you like a role where you can be a specialist and get really, really deep into one thing, like at a big company where you can have a pretty narrowly scoped role and be an expert? Or do you like being kind of jack of all trades, master of none, and more of an athlete, and just take the problems as they come and you'll rise to meet them? So you're right. There's total middle ground. There's lots of mid-sized firms. There's going to be different cultures within a company. And these are also broad generalizations, but I would actually start with knowing yourself first.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And Kiana, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, it's Kiana.
Hey, Kiana.
Hi. So along those same lines, so I currently work for a startup, and I love that, I have that sort of freedom. There's not a set role. I'm kind of wearing multiple hats, doing a lot of different things. So, and thinking about putting that on a resume, I know I had seen somewhere where someone recommended like putting a professional summary on your resume, and that's where you can put kind of a little bit of what you're also seeking in a position or a company. Is that something that you recommend? And if so, like, how do you recommend doing that?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point, because I've been talking about the summary thing, and I referenced it a little bit with Michael with the example of seeking a management consulting role to combine my finance and business. But I actually haven't said it directly. You're absolutely right, Kiana. If you can call out what I'm seeking, what I'm looking for, and of course it should match what you're applying for. So make sure you're just careful about that as you have multiple versions of your resume.
Mhm.
But absolutely, you can say, I am seeking a role with a wide range of responsibilities, that I enjoy solving complex, diverse problems. Like, it's again marketing language, but you could totally phrase it like that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I just thought of another, we're going to go way backwards, but another like very tactical tidbit for your resumes. If you like, part of this is like marketing yourself. You just want the recruiters and the hiring managers to love you. If you save your resume as like your first name, last name, and the company name or the role name, one, you're going to be, it's a lot easier for them to deal with like the back end stuff of downloading your resume and all that sort of thing. But then two, you can keep yourself very clean, so you don't end up uploading the wrong resume. Or like I've seen people who are like, I uploaded Alton Brown soup recipe instead of my resume, or things like that, where it just can keep things a lot cleaner and easier.
That's really good. A lot of gems being dropped tonight.
Good. I mean, it's not like mind-blowing stuff. I'm not going to get the Nobel Peace Prize for this stuff, but hopefully it's helpful as you navigate your searches.
All right. A lot of these things are like sweet. People have had experiences, but just like with the things that you have, I think at so many different levels, I think that it's definitely valuable for sure. Even the small things matter, I think, for all of us.
Good. I'm so glad. So yeah, basically to just like kind of put a bow on the last topic is essentially know yourself, because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Maya, which is like the searching for a job is so damn hard to begin with, and it's so time intensive that if it's not going to be a fit, then, don't spend your time pursuing it. But the things that you really feel passionate about and that would be great fits, pour hours and hours into that one application, because you can it's better to be more targeted than spray and pray. And then lastly, the ways that you can, once your application is submitted, ways that you can make yourself stand out is, I always recommend for people to use LinkedIn the opposite way. So see if I applied to a role, like, who's the manager for that? Can I get on LinkedIn and say, hi, I just submitted my application. I'm really excited about this. Would love to connect with you. That you're not going to get a response 100% of the time, but half the time they'll at least dignify you with a response. And most of that time, they're then forwarding that LinkedIn message to say, hey, did you get this person's application? Where are they at in the process? Things like that. So the people who you would look for on LinkedIn to potentially connect with would be either a recruiter, who you believe to be the hiring manager, or maybe even a peer. I have taken a ton of conversations just because I think it's the right thing to do, whether I'm hiring or not. When people say, hey, I'm really interested in high alpha innovation, I'd love to have coffee or have a Zoom to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing. My schedule doesn't always allow for that. But if you see a potential future colleague or someone who's in the role, you could say, hey, I am trying to break into this. I've never been a marketer before, and it looks like you've got an amazing background. If I can buy you coffee, I would love to spend some time learning a little bit about, your role, and maybe get any advice you might have for me trying to break into the industry. People are generally kinder than you think, and they're probably going to do it.
Really, like I said, another small thing, but that really, really is valuable and important. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Amanda. Do you have any other like small things? I know that we are probably at about 10 minutes over, but I appreciate you guys for staying.
Sorry guys, I had this until 7:30, so I was like trying to fill time. Everyone's probably got to go to dinner, so
I could be wrong, actually. I actually do have, I'm incorrect. And it's
no.
my time is different. So we do have more time as well. So my apologies for that. Disregard.
No worries, Mark. I'm out of gas anyway. I think I'm all out of like my pre-programmed content, but would love, if anyone's got questions or specific situations that I could be helpful with, would be happy to stick around too.
So yeah, that's exactly where I was going is it's just I want to make sure you guys have an opportunity if you come to any of my office hours throughout the week. I'm always preaching, taking advantage of the people that we put in front of you, but also just by engaging yourself as much as possible in this process. So please, if you have any, lingering questions, I don't think any question is too big or too small. Or as Amanda mentioned, if you want to share anything situational about something that you're planning on, encountering here as you go forward and as you're transitioning careers right now. Candace is asking about connecting on LinkedIn, so I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, totally. I would love to connect with anyone and everyone on LinkedIn, and I oftentimes can also be great like directional pointer, where if you're like, even usually like I work in a small company, we don't always have a ton of roles open, but I know a lot of people who hire, so I can always surface resumes and that sort of thing, or try to make a connection to it.
Yes, it seems like Michael does have another question, so
great. Thanks, Michael.
Hello. My question is, I'm working on formulating the question. So
no worries.
So how can you present yourself in a manner you get a role, but even in the interview stage, I think that's a great place to present yourself. That who you are, or how are you planning to come into work, and how you'd like to be treated, and give you a hypothetical. So you got a role. You in interviews, you that's the time to get to know someone, but also catch the social cues or ask a question that you want to see how they will react, right? So how do you present yourself? Say, hey, I'm a non-BS person. Transparency is important. Having a divide between work and personal life is very important. And also respect me. Respect me as I think, an individual, a human being. I think we're homians. I think the scientific word is Homo sapien or whatever. Like, just at the basic, respect me
Yeah.
and respect my boundaries, and I'll do the same. That's the energy I'm coming with. And obviously, there's policies, and procedures in place that you can handle it in a formal manner as it pertains to work environment. But how do you present yourself that way so you can prevent it from happening, so you keep your mental health intact and not let the work impact you as an individual in a negative manner?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a shame that I think every single person on this call has probably had an experience, which we understand why that's on the top of your mind, because we've been dehumanized at work or not respected or flat out discriminated against or just generally had a pain in the ass job that doesn't turn off. Long story short is to say, declaring things like that could come off almost adversarial or defensive. If you were to say, hey, it's really important to me that I'm respected, that's a very, very reasonable response, but that could trigger in their minds of like, he must have had some bad experiences and what was his part and all that. Like, again, it's like that unanswered question thing. I think you can influence more and learn more rather than declaring by asking questions. And so a really effective way for a couple of things that you talked about, which are you're a no BS person, you're a pretty direct communicator. So you could potentially ask your potential manager, I'd love to understand how you communicate on the spectrum of kind of implicit to direct. How would you describe your communication style? So that's like, I hate like to give the advice that's not just straightforward, like it is kind of BS, but it's the way you game the system. Same thing with the question around work-life balance is to say, what would a typical workday look like? Do you expect travel in this? Do you expect responses outside of work hours via email or via Slack? And so that way it's a little bit less declarative and more putting them in the situation to answer the question. And then you can hold them accountable to those answers too, where you can say, hey, you came down on me because I didn't answer your email last night. But when I interviewed, we talked and you said that you don't expect me to be online at all hours of the night.
How do you go about not hypotheticals, but situational events? Like, okay, working remotely, your power just went out. You're not expecting that. But obviously you communicated, or you didn't have the time to communicate due to like a whirlwind just happened, So best advice to approach those situations.
Yeah. It's tough because you can't really predict the future, right? Like we're going to say like, oh, we could talk about the power going out and then instead your internet line's going to get cut off or, something like that, where we can't predict everything. But what we can do is work for people who are reasonable individuals who I think you can suss out with some of those questions that we talked about. And then also building a track record of trust, right? Where I can point and say, you know what, I am not offline I've never had an issue like this before. And so I think that's, because basically working for reasonable people and having a track record of doing the right thing, make it so when these like outside, things that we can't have any control over with, they're less acute and they feel less bad when they happen because they're not like, well, you asked for like 3 afternoons off this week and now your internet's out. It's like, no, I've been keeping my side of the street clean. This is just, a outlier that I can't control.
Awesome. This is really
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wishing that we would have had this session before I applied at Howe a couple of years ago. Then I might be there now. I'm just kidding. But ultimately, I feel like this is really valuable information that you guys have all received. I've been taking notes. Hopefully, you've been taking notes. I wanted to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. I already sent messages to those that haven't necessarily asked any questions yet, it sounds like they are good and all minds are clear. I really appreciate you all taking the opportunity to join us. This is being recorded, so we're going to share this with those who didn't have opportunity to make it. This is a flexible program, so anytime we have these bring speakers in and have these panels and these sessions, it is a requirement. We always will try and make sure we record it so that you still have the opportunity to benefit from it. But I know that I personally plan on actually going back and watching this again and seeing how I can apply it to myself. So if there aren't any lingering or any other additional questions, and Mike did raise his hand again, and that's fine. So, but if you have to drop or leave for some other reason, that's fine. I think people have been like joining in and out of the call already.
Sorry, that's my
dog. Mike, what other questions? What other questions?
Hey, last question. Email address. We can directly. If we have any further questions, statements we need, is there an email address we can contact you at?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put it here in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been such a fun conversation. I'm so grateful to have met you all and be included in this. And so if I can ever be helpful to you, in your job search or in your roles, or High Alpha Innovation can, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love expanding my network and excited that I got the chance to meet you all.
Thank you again, Amanda. I really do appreciate sharing all of your expertise and experience. And I wish you all the best as well. Look forward to connecting with you guys in the upcoming weeks. We have some other exciting professionals that we're excited to bring to you. We have a Google mentor panel that's going to be, I believe, our next opportunity for you to connect with those in some of these roles. But again, I hope that you go back and you reference this video as you continue to matriculate through the curriculum. And as always, if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You could also reach out to Winnie, who I don't believe is on the call any longer. But thank you all again. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a safe and blessed evening.
Thanks so much, Mark. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.